welcome to the live stream today. We're continuing off with some more live streams. This time it's of the RNC, or the Republican National Convention. So today was the first night, the inaugural nights of the RNC. There were some speakers, not great, some better than others, of course, but regardless, there's a lot to get into. So today I'm with Mark Wahab and Rukabache, and yeah, hi guys, what's up? What's good? Yeah, so I mean, there's plenty to talk about. Okay, the first thing is that Donald Trump Jr. in his speech, he says, "Is Pelosi really a socialist? Is she?" Mark, your mic is not working.
I think I got muted by Tom.
Oh, so there's Max. He made an appearance.
Oh, and we have our first comment, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, don't pander to the comments.
Miles, before we start,
don't pander to the comments.
I'm willing to answer your question, but don't we want to do kind of general overview, especially?
Oh yeah, we can do that. We can do that. Like I'm
willing to answer you. I'm just gonna say right off the bat that I don't think Pelosi's a socialist, but we can.
It's just because I think it was interesting how the Republican. Okay, so let's get into overviews, but I just want to say, because we're talking about it right now, it was interesting how I think the even Biden and say Pelosi, who are very moderate in the party, are being lumped up together with the left of the party, and Biden is now apparently like a socialist. He's been attacked several times as being a socialist, and I just find it very funny because it's like all of the speeches, it's like, okay, this guy is, it's very humorous how there are actual socialists in the Democratic Party, and Joe Biden is essentially, these people are saying that Joe Biden is essentially like the actual socialist. So I think although I think, we can talk about this another time, especially, the left of the party, which we always talk about. Yeah, I mean, let's get into overviews. So of course, round table, I'm just going to give my thoughts pretty quickly. I think it was I think it was actually pretty good. I think the RNC made an effort. They had speakers that were, they knew what they were talking. They had good speeches. They were pretty, I think, relatively eloquent. So some of these guys were like really insufferable, especially like the guy with the, I think it was there was this couple that had a gun, and they like threatened these protesters, and they're under indictment, and they were speaking for like 5 minutes, and it was really weird. So I think it was mostly, they had some good speakers. From a strategic point of view, is I think pretty good. They addressed a lot of policy points that Trump advocated for, and that Trump was really for. I think the hostage stuff was pretty good from a strategic point of view. I think also the second thing is regarding NAFTA. I mean, they went really ham on the trade agreements and how Trump try to ameliorate that. And third of all, also on prison reform, and on how he what he was doing with the cops, whatever. I don't know, but I think he addressed a lot of issues, and I think it was actually relatively substantive. What do you think, Max?
I think you're right. I think there was a lot of substance, but I do also think there was, and this is like to be expected, I guess, but there was a lot of like characterizations of like defund the police, kept being like they're just gonna remove police departments, and that's not defund the police first off. And also I think that people are like misconstruing the meaning of defund the police, and they're what they hear is like take all money away from cops, and like our cops are heroes. Why do you want to take away the money, like the money that they need, and not understanding that it's not taking away their money, it's cutting part of their budget to make their jobs easier. And I think that I think that's kind of lost in meaning. And sure, there are people who want to remove police entirely and kind of rebuild a new thing of public safety, but I think the vast majority doesn't want that. And people, I think there have been polls that have said that people do like the police, even though everything that's happened. It's just that people are, there was a lot of like, I guess generalizations and mischaracterizations. I think even though a lot of what they said was substantial, there was also a lot of that thrown in.
Here's another thing I want to add, Max. I think that defund the police argument was really interesting, and obviously it was really recurrent throughout the night. One thing that I think is interesting is that it's characteristic kind of that general strategy that they have to vilify the left as being really socialist, really liberal, really radical. And specifically in this instance, I think it's interesting because you don't actually see that as a main component of the messaging coming out of liberals or more broadly out of the left. What you're seeing is, sure, an emphasis on police reform, but that's not really necessarily targeted on funding. That I think that's been an idea that's been discussed broadly, sure, and you can make that argument. But is that something that's actually being done in practice? Sure, but not to the extent I think that they're suggesting it is. I think, we have the records of Harris, for example, being a tough DA and really kind of pro-police, but also pro-BLM, obviously. And same thing can be said for Biden. The idea that there's going to be widespread defunding of the police is completely false. I think really the emphasis here is on police reform, but again, that doesn't really matter so much. In the grand scheme of things, you're seeing the Republican Party here in this first night really just using this one kind of talking point as a way to vilify the left, not necessarily with any real basis or grounding in reality.
Yeah, Luca, what do you
Also,
think?
I just want to.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing before?
Yeah.
I was just going to say also, I think it was interesting to see that the Republicans used a lot of like Democratic talking points and issues that are usually more direct, and like how the Democrats are like destroying those things and how the Republicans are actually doing it right. And I found that was interesting, and that was like an interesting way to maybe swing voters who are on the fence, being like, these are the issues that the Democrats say they care about, and this is what they're not doing about it, and this is what we are doing about it. So I think that's like also an interesting thing that that I noticed at the convention. Luca, take it away.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I completely agree with you with that, Max. I mean, we've seen throughout the RNC, speakers say, use your First Amendment right, speak up and fight against the liberal mob. I mean, it's obviously a little bit normal trying to influence the left voter to vote for Trump. But I mean, I think that's going to help the election a lot. And I mean, we'll see who's watching, obviously. But yeah, I mean, as well, there's lots of talk about police reform. I mean, there's Donald Trump Jr. talking about the death of George Floyd, how it's unjust, but also how they're going to influence the average American to respect the cop, respect the essential frontline workers as well. And I mean, that's one thing that the RNC did pretty well tonight.
Yeah, I think also, I think in terms of great points, of course, but I think also regarding the attacks that were made on Biden were actually pretty good. I mean, there are a couple of instances that were mentioned. I think the first one, one of the people, again, I don't remember specifically who said this stuff, but one of the people mentioned how Biden has contempt over the working class, and using specifically there's this one video where there was basically there was this like Iraqi veteran, and there is no, actually no, it's a different video I think it was. But there was this one guy who asked Biden about his stance on the Second Amendment, and then Biden kind of dismissed him and said that dismissed him as somebody who's like uneducated, it's like rural workers. So I like, and and I think it goes to show that using that video, I mean, you guys can look it up, but I mean, this specific moment that happened during the campaign last year, and using that moment to kind of highlight how Biden is very anti-worker, and how the Democratic Party is transitioning to a suburban kind of sort of party is actually, I think, one that is pretty true, and it's actually, I think, a good critique. At the same time, though, what I find very interesting is during the convention was like there were a couple people that said that the Democratic Party wants to abolish the suburbs. So of course you have these contrasting criticisms. So one guy is some people are saying that the Democratic Party is a party of the suburbs, but another people saying it's the party of the people, the radicals, right? So and specifically, I'm mentioning the two people, with the gun, with the protesters, who said that the Democrats want to end the suburbs. It's like, what are you talking about? But I think other than that, though, I think there was, there were some good, I think, critiques of Biden. I mean, also there was the Black Democratic state congressman who I think had the correct analysis of saying, okay, Biden, he voted for the crime bill. I've mentioned this several times, but he talks about how Biden voted for the crime bill, and then and kind of uses that as a critique of Biden's stance on race. And I think, again, that is something that the Democrats really rarely mentioned in the debates and in the campaign. So I think that was a criticism that it's a valid criticism, and yeah, I think although as much terrible disingenuous, I think, criticisms, and I think the disingenuous nature of the Republican Party is at the same time, I think, hidden under all of this rah-rah or whatever you call it. There were some substantial, I think, criticisms of Biden, which I think did pull through, like land on his feet.
I think I'd like to respond to that. If almost anyone has a really strong argument against Miles, well, looks like I'm the main speaker anyway, so I might as well go ahead. Miles, I think some of that is valid. I disagree with most of what you just said, but I think some of that is valid. I do agree that the crime bill is not something that was really a positive note on his record. But I think that's just one instance where I think you might be able to say that Biden has faltered in his 50 years of public service, and everyone's going to mess up once in a while.
Yeah, but Mark, I'm not sorry to interrupt, but I mean, I'm not criticizing his specific policy. I'm just saying specifically regarding I'm specifically as an attack, not specifically.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree that was I think it's not like that was a particularly well drawn out attack. I just think it's a valid concern that you could bring up. Not that I think the voters are actually going to be caring about specific details like that. Regardless, I think as a whole, the critique of Biden was not particularly well thought out because it was just full of sweeping generalizations. So this is my issue with it. I mean, if you get down to specifics showing that confrontation that he had with that voter, he might look bad in those certain instances, but that was massively underwhelming in my opinion, at least compared to the consistent attacks of the radical left talking about AOC and socialism. It felt like more like they were trying to criticize the movement and that Biden was a symptom of it, even though, as we know as liberals, that Biden isn't necessarily someone who's representing the progressive wing of the party. I thought it was a really ineffective criticism of Biden because they're not getting into specifics besides that.
Yeah, I think maybe just.
But I think
I'm good to the other people, but Matt. So I think I'm just saying. I think as a generalization, I think what we saw this night is that there are a lot of different criticisms, a lot of different ways to approach attacking Biden. I think there's some specific instances I think that worked. Again, very specific, but as a general rule, I think I agree with you, Mark, that it's really not great to just call Biden a socialist because you're crying wolf, right? You're saying, okay, this guy's a socialist, and when there's the actual socialists that are in the party, I mean, the Republican talking point is going to be like, okay, well, this guy wasn't actually a socialist. What are they talking about? So, I do agree. I just do agree
to respond. Just to respond to that, I think that on they did it kind of. It was kind of smart on their behalf. They didn't say that he was a socialist. They said that the people who are in the Democratic Party are influencing. I think, at least from what I understood, they were saying like AOC and Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders. All these people are now in like the Biden team, and they are pushing him more to the left. They are pushing him towards socialism, and I think that they were that like they weren't calling him a socialist because he's not, but they were like they're saying because of the people he's surrounding himself with, his agenda has become socialist, and because of that, like this and that, and I think that
I think I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I think what I'm trying to make here is that they're denouncing the movement as the whole, and they're saying exactly what you're saying, is that he's letting himself be pushed by these forces that are maybe beyond him. I agree that they're not denouncing Biden directly, but I think just by association, by the fact that he is part of this democratic movement, that he is by extension a socialist.
Yeah, and I mean, wait, just to add one thing,
Mhm.
they even added in the RNC video proof of Bernie Sanders saying that Joe Biden could become one of the most progressive presidents since
FDR.
statement.
Mhm. Which is true. I think
that's but that's I mean that's kind of like a I don't think I mean, and so
Yeah, Max, you're cutting out a bit.
if FDR did great things, like but to me that's that like I think that's why they kind of like made sure to fade out as soon as FDR came on. They're like they quickly moved on. Maybe you wouldn't catch that, just because FDR is very highly regarded, at least from what I understand, in American politics. FDR was one of the most highly regarded presidents. That's why he was the longest serving president. So I think we had a comment from one of our viewers about the McCloskeys, who were the people who came out of their house with guns when Black Lives Matter protesters were protesting on their streets. Does anyone want to start with that?
Yeah, I mean, I actually referenced them a couple of times. So those are the people with the guns on this. Yeah, so this is McCloskey's. Thank you. But yeah, so when I said that some people in the Republican Party said that the Democratic Party wanted to end the suburbs, I think it was them. I think they were special. If anybody's watching, I don't know if any of you guys have watched Parks and Rec, but there is in the show there is this character called Marsha and Marshall Langman, and they're these like super evangelical kind of like very very conservative people. They looked exactly like them in the show. It was very funny. Like it's like the couple. They're both like kind of blonde, like light haired. So it was I don't know. It just reminded me of that. But I mean, they were special, weren't they?
They were a lot of fun.
Yeah,
I feel like there were a lot of meme moments in this convention as well. Yeah, that the passion of Mrs. Guilfoyle's speech, or Miss Guilfoyle, because she's technically not married to Don Jr., although we don't know. Maybe that might happen in the near future. Definitely a lot of meme moments. You could tell that the initial speech, I forget the man's name.
She was yelling. She very loudly.
It was upsetting because the content of the speech was just ridiculous, and I felt like she was completely delusional for the majority of it. I don't know who she thought. She must have thought she was at a rally or something, because you're right, Max. It was hilarious to see her amplify her voice in such a ridiculous manner. And the same thing can be said for, I don't know, I feel like the speech by Vernon, something, I can't remember his last name, the African-American man, the Democrat who endorsed the Republican. So there were so many.
Vernon Jones,
yeah.
Yeah.
There were so many incoherent kind of meme-worthy moments throughout the convention where, I mean, he was tripping up a lot in his speech. And we talked about this in the past. I felt like so little of it was actually grounded in fact. And here's actually a point I want to get into. I feel like a lot of these people are living in alternate realities in a way. They have the facts in front of them. A lot of them are well-meaning. We heard references to Black Lives Matter. We heard references to widespread education, but I feel like they're at a point where I don't want to say indoctrinated, because that's a word that carries a pretty heavy meaning to it. But I feel like they have these issues in mind, but the completely wrong approach to it. And I want to hear your opinions on this, all of you guys. How I mean, I'm kind of going in circles here, and I'm getting a little bit tired, but it's so true. You see these people who are talking about American values of freedom, but then they turn around and they're not supporting policies that actually help them enact the plans that would help them. You know, they don't want to spend money, you know, from taxes.
Yeah.
They don't want to have taxes. They can spend the money so that they can improve the infrastructures of the education and I mean, you know, different institutions across the board. I want to hear your thoughts about that.
So,
Yeah,
Mark,
I think I'll
I
just,
think,
can I just,
no, whatever, sure, I don't.
Okay, go ahead, Max.
Yeah, Max, you're up.
You get Max.
sorry,
You
I don't mean to step on you, Miles, but I just wanted to just have a lot to say. I think you're right that there was this like disillusionment with reality, I think, a little bit, just because Trump brought in like a few postal workers and is refusing to fund the postal service. And he like, and then further in the convention, they were talking about how the Democrats want to tax the poor people to give to the Democratic millionaires. And like it's pretty much the exact opposite. Like Michael Bloomberg was like, tax me, I'll get, like, you know, it was, I think that there was just this kind of like, it was like they kind of flipped everything. Like they took what Democrats believe and they like flipped it. And it's just, it was kind of like annoying to me, like to hear all these people say things that were just blatantly wrong. And like, you know, unless you actually know, you like they said it in very convincing ways. So like, if I didn't know any better, I would believe it. Like, and like, I would be like, well, Democrats are coming for my money. I don't want to support them. And like, Democrats don't want to fund my businesses. I'm not going to support them. Like, you know, it's just, it's a lot. Like it kind of pains me that these people are just so not in touch with the truth that, you know, they're living in their own world.
Sure. No, I think it's totally correct. Sorry, Max, you're cutting out a bit, so I'll just say what I want to say. I think also, like, you know, if we're going with this, you know, kind of, I don't know about policies. I can't mention anything specific right now, but I mean, in terms of symbolically, I mean, a lot of the rhetoric was Trump's a father. He's a good father. He's values our American ideals. And I mean, whether you like Trump or not, it's just, you know, the type of person he is, you know, he's not, I mean, he's, in terms of, you know, being kind of like the good, you know, I guess the stereotype of the suburban kind of patriarch of the family who has these very American values, very steadfast. And it's just like Trump is, you know, you know, Trump's just not that. You know, specifically, you know, I think a great example is a lot of people would call him a religious man, except he clearly isn't. You know, so it's like the evangelical vote would say, okay, Trump is very, you know, religious and you know, he's for the American values. But, you know, I mean, that's the rhetoric that we heard tonight. Except the thing is that Trump is clearly not, you know, evangelical religious in the conservative vein of what you would call kind of like a traditional, you know, kind of a traditional family man. And he really isn't that, whether you like it or not. And you know, it's very interesting because you have this reality reality of who Trump is. You know, he's this person, he doesn't really care about what other people say. I mean, you can say that's whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. But I mean, you have this reality of what Donald Trump is, you know, what he has said in the past, what he believes in, or the lack of belief, really. And, you know, what you know, people on the right think, you know, what his voters want him to be. And so I don't know, I found that a lot tonight of, you know, this saying that, oh, you know, Trump is a great.
Oh,
we lost Miles.
I
think the odds are that his
briefly. I just real quick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just real quick. Just want to interject here. Just got a notification from the New York Times on night one of their convention. Republicans mounted a misleading defense of President Trump's record and painted a bleak portrait of Democrats. And so I think that they're right. Like a lot of it was misleading. But I think that the way that the Republicans have kind of like structured their narrative is that you can't trust the media. And so whatever's reported, you can't trust. Like, don't believe what you hear in the media. Only believe
Mhm.
what we say. And so, like, that's kind of it's kind of like a vicious cycle, because if you can't believe the media, when the media is telling you the truth, then you're like, that's not true. And then when they tell you BS, like when they feed you when the Republicans or people at the Republican National Convention feed you a bunch of BS, and then the media tells you it's wrong, you're like, no, it's not. They said they were right because the media is a bunch of liars. And so, you kind of end in this place of like really mass confusion, I guess, where you don't know what to believe because the media is telling you it's wrong, that the people telling you what they believe to be true, even though it's not, are telling you that the media is a bunch of like misleading people who want to control power and money. Like, it's just, I think it leads to a place where either you don't know what to believe, or you're inseparable from your beliefs, and you won't listen to reason. And I think that's kind of problematic.
I think that's a good point that you make there, Max, because a lot of what we see when people like this get into
just
no worries.
sorry. I just we'll get the coach on Twitter. Okay, I know it's off topic. I mean, that's
yeah, I know.
Go on.
I mean, it's scary. The speech was definitely high. I just wanted to continue responding to what Max said. And when you're kind of bombarded with so much information and you're receiving conflicting messaging on both sides of the aisle, I think it's really easy to fall into kind of, I don't want to say tribalism in a way, where you might latch onto a specific trail of information. That's how conspiracy theories gain traction as well, as we find people who are really maybe on the edges and not really sure of what to think of bombardment of information and the way they've been brought up, different variables that cause different things. And that's how you see groups like QAnon gain traction as well, where I just feel like people who are so lost, once they latch onto something, it's hard to kind of get out of their own way. And that's where you see this alternate reality kind of institute itself as well, where they've shut themselves in and they're unwilling to see information in different, maybe unbiased ways. So I think that's a really good point you make, Max, about that bombardment of information.
Yeah, I was also gonna add. I mean, Ronna McDaniel mentioned appeasement in her speech, but I mean, in the RNC, they were inflicting so much violence and aggression.
Absolutely.
I mean, she even said this election is the most important in our lifetime. I mean, that's insane. Obviously it is very important, and every election is important. But to say that it's crazy. Also with Kimberly Guilfoyle, she was also very, very angry. I mean, very, very vocal, but at the same time, using a lot of pathos and just very aggressive and it shouldn't be like that. It's really, I mean, I wouldn't say it's embarrassing, but it's just it's not the best way to get your opinion across.
Right. So let's talk about like a good speech, because I think a good speech was the Cuban guy. What was his name?
Maximo
Alvarez. I'm not sure, but I mean, I thought that was I think that was a really great speech. It was very like heartfelt. I think he had it was the moment, right? He had to leave Cuba for America, and I don't know. I think that was a great speaker, and really, I think it is. I think it is also like symbolic of the Cuban American vote, which is it's very interesting because Hispanics overwhelmingly vote Democrat except for the Cubans, and my family is in part quarter Cuban, and for example my great grandmother she voted for Trump before, and it's really interesting because you have in the Hispanic world of course you have the immigrants the end of DACA, and you'd expect a lot of people in general that are Hispanic to kind of be against Trump, but it's really interesting how how it's really heartfelt. I think you really feel for this guy, and I think if you're somebody who doesn't really know that much about politics, I think it's a speech that's like, okay, Trump's pretty, he respects the values, and of course I don't believe that. I think he's like the worst guy ever, but at the same time, I think in terms of as speech on its own, it was pretty good. It was definitely. It made you feel happy to be like an American, I guess. Like I think there's sometimes this is very, I guess, conservative, unlike me thing to say, but as a far lefty, but at the same time, it's there's sometimes when you're like, okay, this guy came to America, what a journey. He was in terrible, communist Cuba, which was at the time and still is, a terrible place. There's a lot of bad things happening at the time. And so it's like for him to kind of create his own future here is, I think, really inspiring. Guys, what do you guys think of the speech? Was it like?
I think it did. Oh yeah. Go on, Max.
Yeah, I'm just gonna respond a little bit to Miles. So I think first that I think the reason his speech, he was really speaking his truth and like what happened to him. He was telling his story, and it wasn't coming from like a play. Like it was coming from a genuine place. Like he truly believes that Donald Trump is the best president because of like what he's lived through. Like he lived through the Cuban. He had to flee Cuba because of Castro. His father and grandfather, I think, fled Spain because of and I think that like he was speaking from like his heart and I think to Miles's point that all Cubans, like all Hispanics except Cubans, tend to vote Democratic. I think you're right that that's true, but I've also found like I went and spent 4 days in Florida leading up to the 2016 election to canvass and to get out the vote, especially the Cuban vote. And so while I was in Florida, I saw that a lot of the older Cubans, especially those who left Cuba and fled Castro, those are the ones who vote Republican because they view the Democratic Party as a socialist, communist leaning party, and so they fear, I think, a repeat of Cuba. And so even though necessarily true that they believe, and I noticed that a lot of younger like American-born Cubans were more open to the ideas of the Democratic Party because they didn't have to flee communism. They were born here, they were raised in America, and I think that's a key difference in a lot of communities, the divide between the older generation and the younger generation. And that's why we see a lot of young people turning out for very left-leaning candidates like Bernie and AOC, and why we see older voters tend to lean more conservatively, towards what they, I guess, grew up with, sort of. So I think that's
Max. I think that's a really
another reason why why mass. Sure,
yeah,
sure.
I think that's interesting that you mentioned that age divide, because you see that across the board in the U.S. as well, where that word socialism and the connotations that it carries is they're really heavy connotations for people of the same age range as well. People who've lived through the Cold War, people who've those older generations who still have memories of those kinds of oppressive regimes, and specifically learning about them in school and seeing that these regimes be presented in the newspaper as they're growing up. So it's interesting to see that divide from the Cuban Americans, but also Americans who've lived in the United States for a long time. Another thing that I find interesting is kind of unrelated, and we talked about this over our group text message earlier on today. One person I find that to be really ironic for is the Conway family. Super not fun, but it's entertaining to see play out, even though it's kind of sad. How Kellyanne Conway, obviously senior advisor to the Trump administration, radically conservative, kind of piece of shit human being all around. Her husband is a never Trumper. And then her daughter is a 15-year-old, tremendously active on Twitter, is a Bernie bro and a huge staunch AOC supporter. So it's really interesting to see, and I think just a phenomenal point that you make there, Max, that divide that occurs by generation, specifically in the Cuban diaspora, if you will, but also in other demographics in the U.S. as well.
But I think it's like I mean, I think it does, of course, apply to Cubans, but I think it applies as a rule to, like, most things in to almost every single demographic group in America. Mark, what is like the great quote you like to say? It's like, if you're, I think it's like a Churchill one. It's like, if you're not a socialist by 20, you have no heart.
Oh yeah, it's a Churchill.
Churchill, yeah, exactly. But if you're not a capitalist by 50, you got no brain, or something like that.
I'm not saying I agree with it, because I think the original quote was, if it's something along those lines. If you're not a socialist by the time you're 20, you're heartless, and if you're not I think it's conservative, and I'm not a conservative. So if you're not a conservative by the time you're 50, you're
you got no brain.
You got no brain. Something along those lines. I think it's a great quote, because it's true. For all of history, you see the progressives are usually younger, and I don't know if that's because younger people are more willing to stand up for change. We've seen throughout history protests start at universities, places of learning, where young people are gathering, exchanging ideas. It's certainly the case in the U.S. right now, and the thing is, adversity has become so systemic in the way that our systems are right now, that I have a hard time seeing our generation become kind of shy away from the progressive movement. Especially, our life expectancies compared to the last generations are lower. We have lower per capita GDP per capita, at least expected GDP per capita for our generation. So it's depressing, and I could see how the progressive vote really caters to our generation of people who are going to have it really tough with an expanding deficit. Literally the odds are stacked across us in every single way imaginable. So I don't know. We'll see if the progressive movement persists, but my feeling is that it will. And not to mention, our demographics are changing as well, how minorities are becoming more and more prevalent. By the time 2040 rolls around, the white people will be a minority, at least if current trends continue.
Yeah, and I was going to add, it's also a little bit weird, talking about age, to see Biden become the Democratic nominee. Obviously, he was always the most popular, serving as VP under Obama. But it's a little bit strange, and Democrats are trying to get rid of that old politician stereotype, supporting political candidates like Pete Buttigieg and Andrew Yang. It's just this whole settle for Biden thing is just a little bit strange. So, it really doesn't sort of add up to what the Democratic Party is becoming.
Yeah, I always find it kind of interesting how we always talk about whatever we talk about in terms of politics, it always ends up being about the future of the Democratic Party. But yeah, so I do think that's the right part. Of course, if you're new here, Mark and I often spar over the most trivial of aspects between moderates camp and the progressive camp. But I think if we're gonna go back, I think we should address one more thing, and then go to sleep, because it's like
I'm so tired, dude. I just can't.
I'm pretty tired too. Nikki Haley, 2024 thoughts?
Totally. No. I think she's a closeted never Trumper. That's my full stake. She is I can't even speak today. I'm so sorry, guys. But that's my claim. She was a never Trumper. I think she had a really hard time. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I might be overanalyzing, but my impression was that she wasn't attacking Trump. She wasn't really staunchly in support of Trump. It just felt like she was using Republican talking points. And, you know, in the past, she's been kind of a more, I don't want to say liberal because liberal certainly doesn't apply to any Republican, but certainly more centrist Republican. And I think, you know, we saw her come out in support of Black Lives Matter. Well, not specifically that movement, but in support of George Floyd and, you know, movements that are pro-immigrant, I guess, social justice. So, you know, I think she has a platform that might be that I think that they're not all Democrats, but certainly independent centrists might be receptive to in a potential presidential bid. And a lot of times we see in these conventions, you see candidates make kind of like pre-presidential bids, get their name out there. Nikki Haley has been around for a long time. She has the name brand. She's kind of seasoned political veteran at this point. So I would not be surprised at all for 2024 to see her on there, a new name on the ballot. Maybe move away from the radicalism that we're seeing under the Trump era. Certainly would be a welcome change, even though I think she's kind of retarded. Sorry for our viewers, that's offensive, but she's that's.
Don't be sorry, be better.
I gotta be better. That's right, man.
What I'm gonna, I think I disagree with Mark. I think that usually, at least from what I've understood, candidates who or people who come out sort of as rising stars and candidates tend to have like impactful speeches and like, you know, like meaningful speeches. And I think that Nikki Haley's just wasn't all that good, to be honest. Like if anyone, like personally, like it wasn't memorable. It wasn't something like I've already forgotten what she said. Like, you know, it's not like, it's not, I don't think it really, like, it didn't pack a punch like maybe Obama's in 2004 and, you know, those kind of, like, you know, AOC made the most of her minute. And so, like, you know, those are the ones that maybe are rising stars. And I think that if anyone would have been maybe sort of like a standout, one would have been Trump Jr.'s girlfriend, Valerie Guilfoyle, I think her name was. Like, she just could not stop yelling. Like that was a memorable speech, but like not because it was substantial, but because she like wouldn't stop yelling. Like that voice is stuck in my head. But I think like maybe on policy, I think that they're lining up Democrat turn Republican or Senator Tim Scott. Like those are the ones that I think that they might put on the ballot in 2024, because I think those that they're black men who had like roots in the Democratic Party but are now Republicans, and I think that those are the ones who they're going to want to put on the ballot, because those are the kinds of candidates that I think have a better chance in the 2024 election, because they can get, I think, a percentage of the black vote from the Democrats, which they do so heavily rely on, and you know they can get the Republican vote on top of that. So I think if anyone would be from tonight would be in the running for the 2024, it'd be either Tim Scott or the congressman who is a Democrat.
I agree. Yeah, Tim Scott was good. I agree. Although I just want to say one thing. I'll let you guys talk. I don't think Nikki Haley had to be a particularly not polarizing, but remarkable speaker. I think she just had to get her platform out there, continue building on her name brand. That's just my opinion. Although I do agree. I think Tim Scott, is that his name? The last African American speaker. I disagree with a lot of fundamental things that he said, but I think I agree with you. He's definitely getting his name out there. Could be a rising star. Although I don't know, dude. Widespread appeal for an African American Republican Party. I don't know how well he could do in the primaries. You know, Ben Carson was kind of trash, and he was the embodiment of the Republican Party at that time. So we'll have to see.
I think honestly, Josh Hawley, like he wasn't here tonight, but I think he might be making a run. Senator from Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's probably the future. Like he's a good. I think he might be like future presidential material. But I think Nikki Haley, I mean, she was like very, like kind of like the Marco Rubio vein of kind of a Republican. So she could totally run, right? Luca, what you got to say?
Yeah, I was just gonna add. I mean, I feel like with what's been said in the RNC about small businesses and the average, suburban American family, Nikki Haley actually focused on creating jobs and cutting small business taxes, and I feel like she's definitely got some work to do in terms of her political background. I mean, she's still pretty young, but overall, I think she's a great candidate, and she definitely has a chance to make that ballot. And yeah, I mean, I think that would look really good for the Republican Party, and yeah, I mean, good to see someone younger as well in office.
Agreed.
I think that wraps it up for tonight, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. All right. So, yeah. Okay. So it was
We'll
nice
see
talking
everyone
with you.
back on Thursday.
Yeah. See you guys back on Thursday. We're also doing a final. I have to sit through another 3 hours. So.
I might not join you guys, by the way, on Thursday. I hope to make it, but I'm maybe busy.
All right. Well, look at Mark. We can
Thanks for having me over at least.
Yeah. Thanks, guys, for pulling up. Thanks to all our listeners that are. I mean, it's late, so.
Conversation YouTube debut. Let's go.
Hey, welcome to the channel.
All right. Okay. Bye, guys.
And don't forget to like and subscribe.
Of course.
Smash that like button.
Smash it with your foot.
Leave a like.